Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing the Suicide Diaries by Jessica A. Carter. Details about this series will be in the description below. This is actually a 3-book series, but they're all very short, so I can compile them all into one video. So if you do enjoy the video, please leave a like, drop a comment, and please subscribe. And so yeah, let's just get right into the video. The Suicide Diaries, Book 1. I never really thought about my sexuality when I was younger. I always just assumed I'd fall in love with a boy. You can imagine my surprise when the first person I ever had real feelings for was my best friend Harriet. We'd been together since first grade, when she asked if I wanted to play with her, and we've been close ever since. I spent every other weekend at her house, and whenever I wasn't over there, she'd be at mine. My parents began to call us Siamese twins since we never left each other's side. Over the years, our friendship grew, and by middle school, we were going on double dates and arguing over which boys were cutest. It didn't take me long to realize I had no interest whatsoever in the boys we were hanging out with. But she always seemed to have so much fun, so I played along. When we hit high school, that's when things really changed. I couldn't stop thinking about her, the way she brushed her long blonde hair away from her face, or how the corners of her eyes would crinkle whenever she was truly happy. I admit it took me a while to realize what it was, but eventually I came to see that I was in love with her. Oh, I'd always loved her to some extent, but now I wanted to hold her, kiss her, be with her. Of course, I knew she wouldn't feel the same, so I kept my mouth shut. No sense in ruining our friendship over it. But I had to do something, so I started to write. I spent hours each night pouring out my feelings into a journal I kept hidden under my bed. All the things I wanted to say, to do, everything I thought went into that little blue notebook. It never occurred to me that someone might find it and read it. I figured it was safe. I was wrong. A few months after I started writing in it, I came into my room to find Harriet sitting on my bed with a notebook in her hands and a terrified look on her face. When I tried to explain, she called me sick and disgusting and ran out. Things only got worse from there. At first it wasn't really noticeable. A few glances here, a comment there. But in less than a month, the whole school had completely turned against me. No matter where I went, there was always someone waiting with an attack or insult. My school life became a living hell. Harriet refused to even look at me, and my other so-called friends seemed to enjoy adding fuel to the fire. I was utterly alone. As hard as it was, there was a light at the end of the tunnel. I was a senior, so I only had to make it through the rest of the year and I'd be gone. That was what I kept telling myself, at least. A month before my graduation, I came home to find several of my bags sitting by the door. At first, I thought that maybe we were going on vacation, but when I saw the looks on my parents' faces, I knew something was wrong. The conversation that followed, if you could call it that, was short and to the point. They wanted nothing to do with a freak, and I was to leave immediately. I believe their exact words were, "You are no daughter of ours. Now get out of our house before we call the police." With 3 weeks left of school, I found myself without friends, without a family, and living on the street. On the 5th day, when I walked into school soaking wet and wearing the same filthy clothes I'd been in the day before, I couldn't take it anymore. Their disapproving glances, the insults, I had enough. Ignoring their taunts, I walked to the nurse's office. Not even she wanted to have anything to do with me, and she didn't even bother asking what was wrong before leaving me there alone. I was okay with that, though. It was what I was used to by now anyway. Being alone, unwanted, hated. That was simply a part of my everyday life. There was a box cutter sitting on top of a stack of supplies, and I reached for it calmly. I mean, really, what reason did I have to live? It wasn't as if anyone wanted me anyway. Staring at the blade, I slid it along my finger and watched as a small drop of blood formed. I didn't move until it had dripped down the side of my finger and splattered onto the floor. But once it had, I brought the blade to my left wrist and ever so slowly drug it towards my elbow, starting at my wrist. I wasn't sure how deep it needed to be, so I pressed it in hard, nearly crying out as the pain became unbearable. When it was finally done, I dug into my other arm in the same fashion, digging deep into the skin as tears began to well up in my eyes. At first, I thought I was crying because it hurt, but that wasn't it. Not really. The pain from the wounds was nothing compared to the pain in my chest. To know that something I couldn't control made everyone close to me hate me, that I was somehow no longer human because I liked someone the same gender as me. That was what truly cut me deep. I let the tears flow as I started to get lightheaded, and wondered if there was anyone who would even care when I was gone. I couldn't think of a single person. I can't even imagine them bothering with a funeral. They'll probably just toss me into a box and bury me without so much as a word. That should have bothered me. But as my blood continued to pour out of me, all I felt was an extreme sense of peace. It no longer mattered to me that they all seemed to despise me. Their angry words simply faded away, replaced by a warmth I hadn't felt since Harry had found that stupid notebook. As my eyes drifted to close for the final time, I couldn't help but smile. I was finally free. Here lies Amanda Cray, who loved a girl about her age. Her classmates bullied and parents disowned, so she ended her life with the blade of a knife. The Suicide Diaries, Book 2. When I was younger, playing with trains was cool. All the neighborhood kids would come around to see what kind of crazy setup I'd built in my father's garage. I was a legend. Everyone knew my name, and I had more friends than I knew what to do with. In middle school, my love of trains continued to grow. I found most of my classmates' interest fading. No longer would they wait anxiously to see what I'd put together. Their focus now seemed to be exclusively on girls. That was fine, though. I still had my friends who stopped by to see what I was up to from time to time. They weren't as into it as they once were, but they knew it was important to me, so in a way it was to them as well. When I reached high school, I thought that nothing would change. Those who thought my hobby was strange would continue to leave me alone, but my friends would still be my friends. I had no idea that all that was about to change. It started with the whispers. You know, those little comments people make behind your back. The ones said just loud enough that you're meant to hear it, but not loud enough for them to be obvious about it. They wouldn't want to draw the teacher's attention, after all. Those never really bothered me. At least, not until I caught my friends joining in on them. That was the first time they truly hurt me. It wouldn't be the last. My list of friends began to dwindle from that day forward. First one, then two, then eventually all of them started avoiding me in the halls. They refused to sit with me at lunch and never came to visit anymore. I had been abandoned. I probably could have lived with that, but then the name-calling started. I became known as a locomotive loser and found myself laughed at everywhere I went. My parents were never home, and I didn't want to burden them with my problems anyway. So I kept quiet and tried to act like they didn't bother me. I stopped talking about trains, only building them in the safety of my room, and attempted to start fitting in. I changed my clothes, my hair, the way I acted, but nothing helped. In fact, it only ended up making things worse. The jocks began stealing my underwear and hanging it from the flagpole. The popular girls would make a scene any time I came within 5 feet of them. Even the computer geeks acted like I was some kind of walking disease. It got so bad that I finally went to the counselor for help. I'm not sure what I thought he'd do for me, but I never expected him to laugh at me for being so weak. That was the first time I'd ever cried at school. Things spiraled out of control after that. Word spread about my breakdown in the office, and the whole school was talking about how I cried like a baby. Funny how they never mentioned what sent me to tears. No one seemed to care that the counselor treated me the same way as everyone else. It was always my fault, like I did something wrong to deserve this harsh treatment. When they started putting pacifiers on my desk and dirty diapers in my backpack, I couldn't take it anymore. Without bothering to tell anyone what I was doing. It's not like they would have cared anyway. I left my stuff at my desk and walked home. I headed straight for the garage where all the train equipment was stored. It was obvious my father hadn't been out there for a while, since several of my train sets were still strewn across the floor where I left them a few months back. And suddenly I hated those metal cars for what they'd done to me. If I hadn't been so fascinated by them, if I'd never seen them, then everything would have been different. I could have been a normal kid, done normal things, fit in with the rest. But no, I had to like trains. Grabbing my dad's hammer, I slammed it into the pieces over and over, laughing as they broke apart and chunks went flying everywhere. Now they were just like me, shattered with no hope of repair. Breathing heavily, I stared at the mess around my feet and let the hammer slip from my grasp. I barely even noticed when it hit the ground, too focused on one of the tiny conductors as he swung back and forth from the end of one of the locomotives. As he moved from side to side, I found myself wondering what it would be like to fly like that, to feel that kind of freedom. So I decided I was going to give it a try. I took the rope my father used for tying down tarps and tossed it over one of the beams above me. Then I grabbed a nearby crate and stood up on top of it. I learned how to tie knots when I was younger. My dad used to take me camping a lot, and it wasn't that difficult to fashion a makeshift noose around my neck. Making sure it was tight, I didn't want to come crashing back down to earth. I took a deep breath and jumped. Flying was everything I thought it would be. I was weightless, free. As I struggled for those last few breaths, I knew that I'd made the right choice. No one would ever be able to hurt me again. Here lies Paul Brigand, whose hobby left him without any friends. He tried to fit in despite the laughter and jokes, but eventually found hope in the noose of a rope. The Suicide Diaries, Book 3. I never used to be this big. As a child, I was considered normal weight. Over time, I slowly started to become bigger and bigger until eventually I was almost 300 pounds. My school years were the worst, always being called fatty or whale, but no matter how hard I tried, I just kept packing on the pounds. Year after year, diet after diet, I tried to get my weight under control. But by the time I was 18, I was down to under 200. Unfortunately, I was only about 5.5 feet tall, and that still made me extremely obese. Once I graduated and got a job, though, the childish name-calling and rude comments mostly disappeared. I felt like things were starting to turn around. It was ready to start a new chapter in my life. I never realized that it was the adults I needed to be the most afraid of. I worked in a design firm that dealt with corporate advertising, and I was pretty good at what I did. It was fun, fast-paced work, and it was clear I had a promising adventure ahead of me. That was probably what started everything, when my boss began to give me the first pick of assignments, something he always did for those he was looking to promote. I started finding things left on my desk a few times a week. One time it was a piece of bacon, and there was that picture of a hippo, and even a toy pig. I brushed them off as a cruel joke and figured if I didn't let it get to me, they'd leave me alone. It only made them try harder. Before long, I was receiving rude emails that included snide comments about my weight, so I took my issue up with the head of HR. Do you know what she said to me? She told me that I was imagining things, that the content of the emails was obviously nothing more than playful banter. So I did what anyone else would have done. I went above her head. Her boss made things right by sending out a company-wide email stating that behavior like that would lead to a 2-week suspension. He also offered me an apology on behalf of the company and gave me a small bonus. I know it was hush money. It wouldn't be good if word got out that the company tolerated that kind of abuse. But I was just happy to have it stop. And stop it did. But not the way I hoped for. All I wanted was for them to leave me alone about my weight, to quit bullying me. In the end, they stopped everything. They refused to work with me, speak to me, even look at me. It was like overnight I'd suddenly become invisible. I went from being one of the top designers to working in the mailroom in less than a month. I'd walk the halls to deliver packages, and it was like I didn't even exist. They'd all become so adept at ignoring me, even I was starting to believe I wasn't really there. When they had the staff meeting a week later, I noticed that every single one of my Employee of the Month plaques had been removed. The wall was left with 4 empty spaces where my pictures had been, and no one seemed to notice. I always thought it would be nice to be invisible. That way no one would ever call me fat or ugly again. But it turns out the name-calling wasn't so bad. Not compared to this, anyway. At least when they were teasing me, they knew I was there. Not I'm like a ghost wandering the building. I started having lunch up on the roof back when this whole thing started, and I enjoyed standing near the ledge and looking out across the city. I wondered what it would be like to be one of those people on the ground. Beautiful, normal, liked. When I was alone up there, I could almost imagine it. Hanging out with my friends who enjoyed spending time with me, having a boyfriend that cared about me, and coworkers that didn't despise me. It was perfect. The more they ignored me, the more time I spent up there in my own little world. It was quiet, peaceful, and best of all, mine. Except that it really wasn't. I could pretend all I wanted, but nothing ever changed, and no matter how many times I told myself it didn't, it truly bothered me. Even in my special place, there was still the ever-present feeling of people judging me, mocking me, hating me. Eventually, I started to hear their voices inside my head, their laughter, their painful words, and I'd be unable to sleep for fear of waking to find them standing there pointing at me like I was some kind of circus freak. When I was standing on the ledge one day, looking down at all those oblivious people below, I felt a gentle breeze flow through my hair, and suddenly everything around me began to move in slow motion. All the noises faded away. It was serene. On the top of the roof, high above the ground, there was a queen. No one was ever going to make fun of me again. There'd be no more rude remarks, cruel jokes, pretending I don't exist. No laughing behind my back or leaving obscene photos on my desk. I suddenly felt like I could do anything, be anyone. It was the most amazing feeling in the world. Raising my head to the sky, I smiled. For the first time in a very long time. I was happy. Turning my back to the edge, I closed my eyes and allowed myself to fall. Faster and faster, the air rushing past me as I heard people below me start to scream. But none of that mattered to me now. All I cared about was the welcoming embrace of the concrete below. I could hear it calling out to me, and I knew, at long last, I had found a friend. Here lies Sally Yates, who couldn't manage to lose the weight. Years of diets and doctor visits, but still the insults always persisted. In the end, she heard the sirens call from the top of a long and deadly fall. If you or someone you know is in crisis or having thoughts of suicide, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255.